Welcome to the Fapstinence podcast. My name is Peter Kirsting, and I am joined by my co host, Kevin Wilder. We are trying to find freedom from porn. On the previous episode, we talked about creating healthy habits. We identified 5 healthy habits for an addiction free lifestyle. Today, we're going to be talking about the do's and don'ts of addiction free routines. Now, we've established what we believe are some common things that will help you lead a healthier lifestyle in general, and therefore a porn free lifestyle, and a few things to avoid. We're going to start with the do's though, and then Kevin's going to pull off the negative Nancy's for me. We're going to be a 1-2 combo on this.
You're
So,
going to
Kevin,
focus on the do's. I'll focus on the negative don'ts because I
all
find
right.
myself in my journey focusing more on the don'ts, but that's okay. But
That's
anyway, yeah, I
okay.
mean, it's good to know, the things that you should do, the active things that you should focus on to really
Right,
adopt this lifestyle, and then also the things to know what
right.
to avoid and the actions not to take that will lead you down the road of temptation, which otherwise isn't even necessary to have. So take it away
Proactive
with
on
the
the
do,
healthy.
man. The first
That
do, yeah.
will do. Proactive on the healthy stuff, avoidance on the negative stuff. With that in mind, we're going to start with our first do learn your habits and tendencies. In order to avoid the negatives, you're going to have to learn what your triggers are. We talked about that on a previous episode. If you need to rehash that, go ahead and head on back to common relapses. But learn your tendencies, okay? And also, understand what it is you like and dislike in life. If you know you're someone who has a hard time with stress, you're gonna have to identify when you're feeling stressed so that you don't cope with that via porn. Vice versa, if you're a creative person, finding creative outlets that are healthy things are going to help you establish a routine and habits that are proactive, healthy, and holistically beneficial for leading a porn free lifestyle, Kevin.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is like it's kind of like proactively knowing the things you don't want to do. Almost, right?
And the
So it's
things
kind
you
of like a
do want to
little
do for the positive side
yes,
of it.
exactly. Yes, it's a mix of both. And
Yeah.
we talk about this on other podcast episodes of ours, know thyself,
Mm,
know the things that tempt you, know the things that help distract you or help transmute the
mm-hmm.
energy and temptations that you have into something more positive. The
Right.
more awareness that you have of your strengths and your weaknesses and your interests, the more you can kind of formulate a plan to actually really adopt this lifestyle. Because the more knowledge you have at your disposal in terms of what you need to do to really adopt this as a lifestyle, the more confidence you're going to have to make this happen. And let's be honest here, a
Right.
lot of times when it comes to, falling into, unhealthy porn habits and stuff, it's because you have a lack of confidence or you're running away from something
Mm,
else to that. The more that you have an understanding of what those triggers and those things are, the better chances you have to really actually adopt this lifestyle. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. You make a really good point there, too, because one of the main purposes of knowing thyself and understanding your habits and things is so that you can have the proactive mindset and routine in place, right? So basically, I think of the triggers almost as spidey senses, right? When I'm going, womp, womp, womp. Oh, I know I'm tired today. I'm more likely to have a hard time with this, right? I just called my girlfriend. I was struggling with the camera, and I'm tired right now, Kevin. So I took it out on her. I was being a jerk. And I realized it as I was talking to her because she's really polite and she's very patient. And I was like, I'm sorry, I'm being a jerk. I'm not dealing with this well. I apologize. And it's just true. It's something I have to deal with. I have to recognize that when I'm tired or when I'm hungry or when I'm stressed out, Kevin, those are the times that I am not as healthy of a person. So, understanding those things allows you to recognize with your spidey senses, all right, I'm having a harder time today because of this, this, and this. All right, well, how do I combat those things, Kevin? I get more sleep. I eat more food. I take a step back and I recognize when I'm struggling and I apologize to the person that I was a jerk to. And then just it's a holistic approach to life with the do's and the don'ts.
Yep. And
Speaking
that
of,
that mhm.
If you want to hit
Yeah,
the
just one
don'ts.
last point on that. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things and the actions that you take in general comes down to your self-image, how you view yourself, and also just an understanding of yourself. And the better you can do
Mm-hmm.
that, the better you can interact with the world in general. And this transcends just your porn habit tendencies or bad habits. It
Yeah.
also allows you to act in your best version, interact and
Yeah.
have people view the best version of yourself. The more you
Right.
can know who you are and what you're capable of, the more that you can see, okay, you can judge your actions or whether you were doing the right or wrong thing. And then over time, as you grow and prosper as a human being with time, you can start to actually implement those things and say, oh, well, this isn't congruent with who I
Oh
want to be.
yeah.
This is congruent with who I want to be. And it's, that's just life, I guess,
Right.
I mean, that's why
And
it's the most powerful quote of all time, in my opinion, know thyself, those two
right.
simple words.
I really like that one too. And you kind of touched on it by saying it right here, but I'm going to be a little bit more blunt. I'm going to hit you over the head with the hammer on this one. Basically, this is not only going to help you free yourself from the addiction to pornography, it's also going to allow you to, by knowing yourself better, have a better relationship with your friends, family, and significant others. It's going to allow you to register what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. And I believe that if you can mitigate or lessen your weaknesses and augment or increase your strengths, you're going to be a more well rounded person. You're going to be a happier person, a more successful person, and you're going to have more control over the things like the addiction that you're struggling with. Well, that's the first do, Kevin, but what's the don't?
All right. So the first don't is don't count your streaks. Okay. I need to be a little bit, this is half me talking to myself because, and half me talking to the NoFap community
Yeah.
because, you know, us as men, we're very, very competitive creatures, right?
Mm,
Think about it. Which is the sex slash gender, whichever one you want to use. I guess it's the same thing. Well, maybe depending on who you ask is not, but they're wrong. Anyway, depending for when it comes to the genders, which is the more the side that plays video games, which is the side that wants to go for the high score and stuff. It's boys, it's men. There's a natural part of us that gets really competitive. It's like, yes, high score, high score, high score. And people start treating their no fap streaks as like a high score thing, as if it's like, wow, well, look, I beat this high score. And sometimes that can be motivating, sure.
right.
But it's motivating, but at the expense of, if you do fail, if you do screw up even one time, then it's almost like you spent all this time playing a video game, right?
It's like a
And
permadeath
imagine
video game,
it's a
like the one where
permadeath,
you
but
die, you're dead,
yeah,
dead.
you're dead, and then you have to start all over again. You put in
Yeah.
all this work, all these hours on this video game, and then all of a sudden you die, and then you have the entire game starts over. It's like, okay, what's more likely to happen? Are you more likely to restart and start again, or are you more likely to just quit? Right?
I don't want people to rage quit porn abstinence, Kevin. I do not want them to rage quit.
Same here, man. And it's really motivating to go to the next level and the next level, next level. But, this is a journey. You're not going to, especially if
Mm,
you're just getting into this stuff, you're not going to completely quit off your first attempt. You're gonna die. You're gonna metaphorically die in the sense of you're gonna relapse. Okay.
yeah.
The thing that you have to take into account is that you're a human being. You have moments of weakness. You're gonna screw up. All right. It's not a fun thing to think about. You don't
Yeah.
want to plan to fail, but go in knowing that failure is possible, and it's all about mitigating risk, right? It's like risk to reward,
Yeah.
all those types of things. It's mitigating risk. You don't want to go in where, if you do end up failing in any way, then it's just game over. You just die, right?
Yeah.
Now I understand it's a little bit of a, I guess, kind of a catch 22 in the sense of like, if you go into this thing thinking like planning to fail, then you're not going to work as hard. But also,
Mm,
if you go into it planning to never fail, then when you do fail, then it's just all over, right? So I
mm,
understand that mentality of like that all in mentality, and that's fine. But just in case that does happen, you still need to think about what happens here.
yeah.
And so let's talk about this too. Let's dive into this a little bit more. If you take the same video game analogy that we just brought up,
Permadeath and rage quitting.
yeah, um, just assume that, the first time you play the game, you're probably going to die along the way, right? But if you quick save right before, then it's okay, you just continue on, right? Rather than starting all over. Now,
Huh.
let's say that you keep playing this game over and over again over time.
Right.
Eventually down the line, you're gonna get so good at it that you're pretty confident you're not
Ah,
gonna die throughout the whole thing because you've mastered the game so much. So
right.
at that point, you can be like, well, I can count my streak because I've really mastered this game and it's not a big deal. At that point, because you're such a master of the game, you can pretty much just go for the high score and that's okay. But when you first pick up the controller to play this game, that's probably not going to be the case, right? So instead of taking that mentality of treating it like if I die, I have to start all over, treat it like, okay, well, I died, but the objective of the game is to die as little
Mm,
times as possible, right? But the objective of
yeah.
the game, so that way, what's better instead of counting your streaks, what I tell people is to count their relapses, right? Try to
Mm,
minimize the amount of relapses that they have, because what ends up happening is, let's say that you have this great streak and you're really proud of having 1 month of no fap, which is amazing and very commendable, but you end up relapsing on day 31. So what ends up typically happening after that, because this actually happened to me the first time I did my first 30-day streak,
right.
um, I ended up watching so much porn the weekend afterwards that I pretty much was almost like back at ground zero from where I
You're like
started.
catching back up with all the time that you didn't spend with porn.
Exactly. I just dive right in. It's kind of like
Yeah.
someone who does a really rigorous diet and they lose a bunch of weight. And at the end of the diet, over one weekend, they just consume like 20,000 calories a day and then
Mm,
just put on all the body fat that they lost, which as a fitness professional, I can tell you is actually possible. It's happened to some of my clients before. It's even happened to me before after I did an intense bodybuilding competition prep. You could do the same thing mentally with all the mental and cognitive benefits and the rewiring of the
mm,
brain that you did through, really kicking this addiction. That addiction can just come right back and have a hold of you right again,
yeah.
because of that. So, in order to prevent that from happening, the best thing that you can do is, let's say you do relapse, right? Instead of
Mm,
just beating yourself up over so much, just change the rules of the game there. Instead of you counting the streaks at that point, then you should just be like, okay, I'm just going to count and minimize the amount of relapses I have during a certain time frame, right? So let's say you get to a 30-day streak, which is really good because you still want to have goals in that sense, especially initially, right?
yeah.
Once you relapse, when that does happen, the game changes. The game doesn't become, oh, I need to reset now and try to reset my streak. The game becomes, okay, so now that the relapse happened, I'm going to minimize the amount of relapses from now on, right?
Mm,
So the next goal that you can set from there, for example, could be, all right, I'm going to expand this to 90 days. I'm already 30 days in. I relapse once within the 90 days. I'm going to try to have as little relapses as possible within these 90 days. Then after that, the 90 days resets, right? You hit the 90 days. Let's say you relapse 5 times. That's okay. What you want to do after that is, all right, so the next set of 90 days, I'm only going to relapse 3 times. And then after that, relapse 1 time. After that, relapse no times. And then at that point, you're more of a master of the game where you can actually treat the game as and treat it like, well, I'm never going to die in this game because I mastered it. I hope
yeah.
that analogy made sense. I love video games, so that made sense to me at least. I hope it made sense for
Well,
you
so
and people viewing.
I think it does. I think really what we're talking about with that analogy and with this idea of not counting streaks is restructuring your mindset to not make it so hard on yourself and to recognize the successes you have while also building on them. Because I think as human beings, unfortunately, have this tendency to gravitate towards negatives or failures, as you mentioned. So I'm going to use another analogy, Kevin. I'm going to use the analogy of the sport of baseball because baseball is my favorite sport. And I would say it's one of the most mentally challenging sports because it's actually a sport of failure. The best players hit the baseball at a 300 average, meaning 3 out of 10 times they succeed. It's easy to do the math. That means 7 out of 10 times they don't hit the ball. That's a pretty high failure rate, 70%. As a professional at the highest level, that's a really good player if you're hitting the ball 3 out of 10 times. But when you're a professional baseball player, the worst thing you could ever do is to think about the 7 times that you failed, because you're not going to succeed more by thinking about the failures. So I think that's something to very much bear in mind, whether you're trying to lose weight or hit a baseball better or be better at this permadeath video game that you're playing, or if you're trying to quit porn, is if you're so focused on your failures, then you're going to have a hard time succeeding more. Versus if you're realistic, but you're paying more attention to the positives of like, hey, I got a little bit better than last time. Hey, I'm a little bit more in control than last time. Hey, I recognize what it was that made me relapse, and I'm going to try to avoid it this way next time. Life is a learning curve, right? You don't just go, uh, another video game analogy, you don't jump from level 3 to level 99 and to face the end boss overnight, right? You can't grind your life that fast. So I think that's a really good analogy. The sport of baseball is a sport of failure. And yet, even though a player could be failing the majority of the time, they could be really successful. And the same could be said for you as you're overcoming a dopamine dependency, especially for something as chemically rewarding as that. You're not going to rewire your brain overnight. You're not going to redo the habits of your life overnight. So you do need to be patient and reset your mind frame about these things.
That's a great point that you brought up, and we'll wrap up this point in a second with the baseball analogy. Baseball is also one of my favorite sports. I'd say I played it throughout my whole life up until I played in high school as well.
Oh yeah,
And something that ends up, yeah,
me
I
too.
was a really I was pretty damn good. Not gonna lie, I was better at football, but I was a good baseball player.
Nice.
But anyway, when it comes to baseball, so let's talk about the concept of a slump, right? When you go
Right.
through a slump as a batter, the worst possible thing that you can do is focus on the fact that you're in a slump. If you just trust in the law of averages, the fact that okay, throughout your career you were batting like a 300, even though you're batting like a 100 for a span of 5 games or so,
Hmm.
you just trust that you just keep doing what you've been doing. You don't try to screw things up, and then it's gonna, you
Yeah.
know, don't try to do drastic weird stuff, and just trust the process what you've been doing that you're going to get over it, and then the law of averages is going to
Yeah.
come back, and then you'll end up batting 300 again.
Yeah.
And what you have to do when it comes to like when you relapse, when you're going through a slump, let's say you relapse and you're going through a tough time in your life, and you just keep relapsing and relapsing and relapsing, instead of just being like, okay, well, you know, imagine you're a baseball player going through a slump. Instead of just being like, well, I used to be a 300 batting average guy. I guess I just bat 100 now, right? If you put that self identity on yourself as someone who's a failure in that sense, when it's basically objectively not true, you're just going through kind of a tough time temporarily. The worst thing you can possibly do is just fall headfirst into the slump and then just be like, "Well, I suck now." No, just
Yeah.
keep going through. Just keep up the practices, keep trying, and
Hmm.
you'll get back on your horse again eventually. And then look, like
Yeah.
we talk about this before, it's a journey. And like you just said, maybe you're on level 3. If you try to reach level 30, which is basically, you know, full freedom from porn, you're not going to have what it takes. You're not capable of that yet, right?
Yeah.
So, so that's a good way to look at it. All right,
Yeah.
so I think that's a good way, a good transition. Actually, let's transition into the next
Absolutely.
do.
Back to the do's. And
Yep. So the
I'm
next
going to
do,
start with,
go ahead.
what's that?
I'll let you introduce the next do and talk about it.
Yeah. I just want to start this one with analogy as well, because I think it's pretty apropos. So I'm a big proponent of creating goals and healthy habits for my life. And one of the things that I've studied and learned is the concept of creating SMART goals. And SMART stands for, it's an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time based. So when we're trying to create healthy routines, that's the next do, establishing routines. And I tacked on their journaling because I think that's part of creating a healthy routine. I think it's a very necessary part of it. But if we're going to be doing that, we need to be creating smart routines. And I think this is a very good segue from our last point, because if you are going to succeed, you need to create smart goals. And that includes when it comes to creating the structure, especially for combating porn addiction. Because if you're not making a realistic goal for yourself, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? In the previous episode, we talked about not leaving your phone by your bed because if your phone is by your bed, you're more likely to look at it and maybe choose to look at porn. Versus if you leave it on the other side of the room, you're going to sleep better, but you're also not going to be as likely to pick up your phone and subconsciously just start looking for that kind of stuff. So it's important to make a very specific goal for yourself, a very specific routine for yourself in this situation. Make sure it's something that you can check off, right? Either it happened or it didn't happen. Did I journal Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? It did or it did not happen. And I would say, even more than that, you should be specific with that. When are you going to journal, right? You need to make it part of your routine. So it's got to happen at a specific time of day. So be very specific. It's going to happen at right after breakfast every day. Make it measurable, right? Attainable. Is it something that you can realistically do? If not, find a different goal. Uh, and then time based, meaning over time, like you mentioned with the relapse counter, Kevin, you should be able to come back and reevaluate the goal. So if it's a 30-day thing, that's why those kind of challenges are so important, right? You can say, all right, what did I get done in 30 days? It's a very specific time measurement. And then you can kind of reset, right? If you had a really rough 30-day challenge, you didn't do that great, you can reset, start fresh. If it was a really good 30 days, that's great, but you got to reset anyway and make the next 30 days even better. So, whatever you're doing to establish your routine, it needs to be a smart routine. And I think one of the smartest things you can do is be journaling throughout your routine because you're going to need to start to identify your habits and your triggers. We talked about this in a previous episode, but this is where journaling comes in so clutch, Kevin, because if I'm writing down, especially after my relapses, okay, how was I feeling? Was I tired? Was I sad? Was I lonely? Excited? How intense was that feeling? Was it pretty like low? Was it like a high in feeling and intensity, right? Um, what time of day did it happen? If you start to journal down like those kind of notes and then just how you feel about it and some other things like that, there's some therapeutic elements to journaling that I think are really healthy. But on top of it, you're going to start to notice the trends. And we mentioned in this previous episode, it's really important to identify your personal triggers so that you can create your proactive routine to set yourself up for success rather than failure.
Yeah, and I think something that's really really effective about journaling. There's a few things going on here. One, getting yourself out of your head and putting your thoughts on paper, and then that way, you bring these. Uh, we talked about this before, but the more that you know yourself, the more you have an understanding of what's going on, the more that you can identify the thing that's tempting you and then plan to resist that or take action based on that.
Mm,
Sometimes when you're in your head too much, you have all these ideas and stuff floating around in your head. You have 35,000 thoughts that go through your mind every single day. And it's hard to pinpoint what of those thoughts are kind of like controlling your actions. So if you just write down, you can just see and just don't judge yourself. Just go off of like what's going on, how you're feeling, all those types of things, what you want to accomplish for the day, what you want to do. You can look back at that first of all as reassurance to make sure that you can attack your day the way that you want, the way your best self wants. But also you can really see and identify the things that are kind of holding you back, the things that are really bothering you in that moment. And what's also cool is over time, if you're consistent with it, you
mm,
can look back 6 months earlier. This is what I like to do with my own journal. I like to look back and see how far I've come. And what that ends up doing is when you look back 6 months from now, so in 6 months, let's just say that you're porn free, which should be a goal of all of you guys watching this, right? you look back and you see, okay, well, here was my past self really struggling. And then look at me now. This is awesome. That helps give you a self image of someone who has conquered pornography and porn addiction. And when you give yourself that self image and you truly believe in it and you have reassurance based on seeing the journey from where you were to where you are now, that really helps you actually believe in it, not
Yeah.
just convince yourself to believe in it. You have concrete evidence that that happened.
Hmm.
And when you give yourself that identity, you're going to act in congruence with that identity. Um, so, for
Yeah.
example, and this isn't an idea that I came up with. This is from one of my favorite self-help books, Psycho Cybernetics. It's like the Bible of self-help. They call it that for a reason. It's truly brilliant. But think of it this way: someone who is a 80-year-old man, when he wakes up in the morning, he's going to act and view the world and think differently because he knows he's an 80-year-old man. He's going to interact with the world like probably how an 80-year-old man would, as opposed to, let's say, a professional NBA basketball player. He wakes up in the morning. He knows he's a professional NBA basketball player. The way that he talks and acts and interacts with people is going to be a lot different because he knows he has the self image of a NBA basketball player. So similarly, in your case, if you're the type of person you have the self image of yourself as someone who is, I'm a porn addicted loser, you're going to act and
Hmm.
interact in the world as if you're a porn addicted loser, and your actions are going to follow suit. But if you think of yourself as someone who is a strong person who conquered pornography and conquered his addiction, you're going to act in that way and congruent in that
Yeah.
way. The tough part is actually believing that. So how do you believe in
Right.
that? Well, by objective measures, right? If you haven't watched porn in 90 days, for example, you could say that you conquered it. But also, when you look back on where you used to be and how much you've come from that point, it's a lot easier to believe in it, and you're going to act more in congruence with that. And then,
Yeah.
then that's kind of a true way to find freedom from this stuff is to have ways to give yourself a new self identity of someone who's free from porn. And the way that you believe in that through your mind and your actions are going to follow suit with your own self-image. The way you believe in that is actually seeing in the past how far you've come, and that you can objectively see from an objective lens that you are no longer addicted. And
Mm.
journaling and doing those types of things can really help reinforce that belief.
Yeah. I don't ever want to necessarily tell people like this is the routine you have to follow in order to be porn free, because just like dieting or exercise, there's no magic pill. There's no one way to get things done. But what I do think is important that you're very structured, organized, and intentional about the way you go about things. So, knowing who you are and what your habits are like, whether you're an introvert, whether you're an extrovert, you know, how you cope with things is going to allow you to create the routine that's best for you. We're just trying to establish some common do's and don'ts along the way. And to me, I think most people can benefit from some form of journaling. You know, if you're like me, I don't like to handwrite stuff. So I could type out my journal or even do it as a voice note, but make it a structured part of your environment. So maybe you do it right before you go to bed or right when you wake up in the morning, but make it a consistent time of day, potentially, ideally, a specific place in your home. So you're training your brain, you know what? Now's the time to think about this, make this happen, and be very intentional about writing down what you're thinking, and it has a lot of benefits outside of this porn addiction. I'm actually really looking forward to getting back into journaling as I go on this road trip, Kevin.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Dude,
but
road
with that
trip's
in mind,
exciting.
I it's going to be stressful, I already know in some ways, but it's going to be a lot of fun as well. So I always enjoy when met you in Vietnam. Actually, I was journaling at the time, and I actually every once in a while go back and read some of the things I was experiencing in the moment there, and it definitely helps you remember things better, if nothing else. Like my memory is better simply because of my intentionality of writing it down. I think I remember what happened in Vietnam better than I would have, even though I haven't gone back and read it that many times, simply because at the end of the day I wrote down the things that stood out to me, and I try to do it in a very descriptive way, you know. But with that being said, do establish a routine. Please at least give journaling a try. You know, it's not like an unmanly thing to do. Kevin, that's the second do. You need to establish a routine, and I really encourage people to journal if they haven't given that a try before. Can you hit us with the next don't?
Yeah. So the next don't is to don't dwell on a relapse, and more importantly, to forgive yourself and move on. Look, when you're first starting this journey, a relapse is almost inevitable to happen. And like I talked about earlier, you don't want to go in thinking, well, I'm going to relapse anyway. So what's the point, right? You don't want to go in with kind of
Right.
a failure mindset going in. But whatever action you do, even if you're going in with the utmost confidence, you still want to prepare for the worst happening. So then that way you don't just knock yourself out of the race, right?
Yeah.
You still want to make sure that there's something that you can do to continue on the journey. So that being the case, you know, really what ends up happening a lot of times is you built up your self-image as someone who's on the road to conquering porn, which is awesome, and that's done through having a long streak, and you feel like you're finally starting to conquer this stuff. And then one day something might happen. You might be extremely stressed, or your girlfriend breaks up with you, or a girl you've been talking to and dating for a while just doesn't, starts flaking
Yeah.
on you. All of a sudden your self-image is tarnished, and what ends up happening is you have a moment of weakness, and then you relapse. So when that happens, this has happened to me, this has happened to multiple other guys too,
Mm,
a lot of guys who are on this journey, you have a decision to make when you relapse there. One, the decision which unfortunately a lot of guys end up making. Oh crap! I just undid all of the progress I made. I'm such a loser, and because I'm a loser, it doesn't matter anyway. So I'm just going to do what feels good, and then that
right.
ends up with you doing relapsing many more times.
Right.
The second thing that you can do is to forgive yourself and be like, look, I screwed up one time, but just because I screwed up, that doesn't mean I'm a failure. I failed once, but that doesn't mean I'm a failure. So I'm just going to move
Yeah.
on. I'm going to acknowledge that it happened, and that's okay. I'm just going
Yeah.
to go on the journey again. I had a little bit of a slip up. That's all right. I'm just going to move on. When you choose the latter, that is the best way to actually guarantee in the long run that you can really be free from porn. Because if you take on that loser mindset, which ends up happening for unfortunately a lot of guys when they first relapse, that's a reflection of them not forgiving themselves and them accepting this a negative self-image of themselves, that they're a failure type personality. But
Right.
if you just acknowledge that you're a successful person and you're successful with things that you set out to do, then you can just look at it as like a little bit of a blip on your journey, and it's not a big deal. If you fell, you just get back up and then you keep going.
Right. Whether it's your first relapse or your 50,000th relapse, that remains the same. And I think there's a saying that I think really hammers this point home, which is that life is about the pursuit of perfection, not about the attaining of it.
Mm.
Basically, you're always supposed to be improving as a person, but you can never expect yourself to be perfect because that's not human. Human beings are naturally flawed. They're gonna make mistakes. They're gonna be selfish. They're gonna be short tempered, even with the best of intentions. The same thing is true when it comes to trying to quit an addictive thing. You've got to give yourself a little bit extra breathing room. Now, obviously, it's important not to give yourself too much slack, right? But I think, to be honest with you, if you're already at this point where you're saying, I want to quit porn, you're more likely to be in this, and you've been finding yourself struggling with it, especially, you're more likely to be in the mind frame of being too hard on yourself when you relapse rather than giving yourself too much slack, you know? So that's a really, really important but difficult thing to do. Brush it off, as my mom likes to say to me, knock it off a cliff. All right, just let it go. Boom, move on. Speaking of moving on, the next point we want to get to is you got to talk with your accountability partner. And if you don't have one, you need to get one. We used the analogy in the previous episode about a brick wall. If you are a brick in the wall, like the Pink Floyd song, You need the foundation below you to hold you up, and you need to hold your brothers up above you, your sisters as well. We're not trying to exclude them, obviously, but a lot of times we're focused on men here because they're dealing with addiction the most. Point is, you need structure, you need foundation, and a big part of your foundation is the society around you. If your friends and your family do not support you in what you're doing, it's going to make it intensely harder for you to battle this addiction, right? And you don't need to involve everybody in your life and be like, yo, I'm addicted, help me out. But you do need somebody, a confidant, a homie, somebody who is your rock, your foundation, the person you turn to and say, hey, dude, I'm having a hard time. And if you are someone's accountability partner, vice versa, you do not want to wait until your homie calls you up and says, hey, dude, I'm having a hard time. Nah, nah, nah. You need to call them and be like, yo, Kevin, it's been a week. How you doing, man? And he's like, oh, pretty good. It's like, have you had any relapses recently? Are you like going strong? And you're like, well, I had a couple. And be like, oh man, that's tough. Like, how are you handling it? Like, what are you doing on your habits, man? And you just have that kind of conversation with each other where you don't have to dwell on the relapse, right? That's what we just told you not to do. But you do want to have this bonded relationship where you're looking out for each other and you're supporting each other because you need that to succeed.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to make sure that it's someone who knows you well enough that they know what you and your best version, your strongest
Hmm.
version looks like, and they know how to bring that about in you. Now, do they need to be like some motivational speaker friend? I mean, if you have one of those, that's great. But more importantly, someone who really understands you and understands how much quitting porn matters to you, right? Because
Right.
if you're at a low enough place where you like, well, first off, like you said, it's good to check in regularly. But let's say that you're at a really low spot in what's going on in your life, and let's be honest here. Typically, when you're on the verge of a relapse, it's typically at a point in your life where something went wrong. You're seeking some kind of avoidance, and there's something deeper going on than just the superficial pleasure of ejaculation, right? Typically, it's something deeper going on there.
Yeah.
So that being the case, when you reach out to someone who's close to you, they understand first of all that you're again, like I said, that you're actively trying to quit this bad habit,
Right.
and this pleasure seeking in order to run away from pain. Um, but they also recognize and they know kind of what's going on in your life, and you're comfortable enough to tell them about some of the bad things that are going on in your life.
Yeah.
If they know you well enough, they know what you and your best version looks like, and they can bring you up from that deep place. They can kind of, if you're like stuck in a hole or stuck in a ditch, they can help bring you out of it because they know you well enough, right?
Right.
So the best person to be able to do that is someone who knows you well, has your best interest in mind,
Hmm.
and understands how much this stuff actually matters to you, and they can pump you up
Right.
and bring you back to the place that they know you as, right? The best version of you that they like hanging out with, the best version of you that they love. They know how to bring that out in you if they know you well enough.
Right. And your accountability partner has to be someone that you can talk to straight, right? You shouldn't be embarrassed to go to your accountability partner. So choosing someone to do this for you, first of all, it's not a small task. So you don't want to just ask any old person to do this, right? You want to choose the right person. So Kevin and I are going to really kind of dive into this more in a future episode of how to choose the perfect accountability partner, but you want someone who's got your back through thick and thin, and whether or not you relapse, they're not changing their support for you because that's how you should feel about yourself as well, right? Don't get down, get going. Speaking of getting going, Kevin, maybe we should move on to this next point, our final don't, and then a little bit of a recap of the week.
Absolutely. Our final don't is to not you. Uh, Let me rewind. Sorry, tongue twister there.
Do
Don't
not.
expect. Yeah, do not. Don't do it. Okay. Don't expect immediate success because dopamine is a hell of a drug, and if you have if you're seeking dopamine and your brain has made the connection that it finds its dopamine from porn, then it's going to be really hard to rewire that. And the fact that something is difficult, anything that's difficult worth overcoming is going to take time. Okay. And that's the part where a lot of people screw up with a bunch of different aspects of life, not just getting over porn addiction. If you're trying to have a successful business, create a successful business, people want to become millionaires within like a year. That's not going to happen.
Nah.
Okay. And also it's actually a good thing that it takes time because
Right.
that way, you might just get lucky through a few environmental changes. You haven't actually changed much internally. You just have other things going on in your life that give you the false belief that you actually overcame this addiction when in reality you didn't. But over a long enough time frame, you can actually have that assurance and that confidence that you truly overcame it. So, for example, um, let's say you thought you overcame this addiction, but you were single this whole time, and that's why you fell into porn. But let's say you ended up getting like a girlfriend that you haven't had in a while, and then the sexual part of it's kind of handled via, your physical relationship. But then you and your girlfriend break up, and what happens then? Well, you were still in a way, um, you were still in a way a victim because even though you weren't watching porn during that time, you're still a victim to your hedonistic sexual impulses, and you never actually had control of it. It's more so
Yeah.
the the process that through which you went through it was sex with your girlfriend, right? But you're still a slave to your sexual impulses, right?
Yeah.
So even though technically it was not through porn anymore, as soon as you guys break up, then all of a sudden you're single again. What do you think is going to happen? You're just going to dive right into porn again, right? And that's over a temporary period of time. But that being the case, if you go, you know, if it's like a whole year or a whole 2 years or a whole 3 years has passed, and at that point you're still not addicted to this and you've gotten over some of this stuff, then you can be assured that it's as a result of the work that you put in to change it, not just because your circumstances changed temporarily and you never actually got over the addiction, right? So it's actually a good thing that it takes longer to
Mm.
truly get over this stuff because that's first of all, it's going to make it more fulfilling
Right.
once you get to that because you can see, you can look at the journey of what you
Wow.
overcame, right? So,
That's a really, really powerful point, Kevin. I appreciate that you brought that up. And I hadn't been thinking about that prior, but I definitely think it's something worth delving into just a little bit more, even because I'll use two analogies and they're a little bit intense. But the first one being if you're someone who has gotten to a point where you're unhealthily large, you need to get a surgery in order to decrease your weight, right? You've gotten to the point of being 500 pounds, and then you get a surgery, and then you do lipo or stapling or whatever, and they bring you back down. That's great on the level that now you're not going to die. You're not in immediate danger of dying. But because you didn't have to work to lose that weight, you haven't changed your habits very likely. And you're in danger of gaining back all of that weight if you don't go ahead and change those habits, right? And you see this happen. There are real life examples of this. People who just they paid the money to get the lipo or whatever, but they didn't change their habits. And there's no accountability there for themselves to change their actions. And it really the problem hasn't gone away, even though the weight that is, secondary has. On the flip side, and I think the word we're really looking for here is immediate versus delayed gratification. If you're someone who seeks immediate gratification, which is most of us, at least in the United States of America, because it's constantly in our faces, fast food, uh, you know, TV shows are getting shorter and faster, and there's action the whole time. You can't sit through an entire Western because there's horses riding along for 20 minutes. You can't watch that anymore, right? You need to have action, action the whole movie. Uh, Whatever it is, our society has a very short attention span, and it breeds a culture of immediate gratification. And yet, who are the types of people that we aspire to be the most like? I would argue the ones that we've seen go through the hardest stuff and still attain their goals. Case in point, when I was living in Korea, Kevin, I did a couple races and I was doing a 10-kilometer race in uh, Jinju, which is the southern part of South Korea. And at the race, before the race, they introduced this older man. He's probably in his 70s, and he was blind. And he goes around Korea and around the world participating in marathons. And he, as a blind man, does not allow his lack of sight to impede his goal of running around the world. And I was really impacted by his story because when you see him, you immediately think of his limitations. Well, he's blind. It's got to be harder to run that far. But why am I so moved by that? Because even though he's clearly limited in a physical sort of way, he hasn't allowed it to stop him. He's chosen to surpass the difficult obstacle in his way. And porn addiction is a difficult obstacle to overcome. But if you can learn to delay your gratification, in this case with sex or pornography, and learn to have a um, healthy mindset towards it and appreciation of it, then you can really enjoy the reward without having it be a destructive element of your life.
Absolutely, man. That's really inspiring. Wow. I think you did tell me about that before, but that's really really amazing. Yeah, it's anything worth doing is going to take time, and I think as human beings, we all recognize that at some deep level. And I think also because we talk about the importance of establishing a new self-image of yourself as someone who's not porn addicted, I actually think if you get over this addiction really really quickly, you're actually not going to really actually believe it yourself because you know deep down that in order to really have any kind of change, it takes time. So if this is the case for all other areas of your life, if all of a sudden for some reason one area of your life, which is curing your porn addiction, is an exception to that rule, it's going to be hard for you to actually believe that you actually overcame it. And the reason it's hard for you to believe that you actually overcame it is because you probably actually didn't overcome it yet, right? It's just that you've done a successful job in establishing and changing your environment for that to happen, which is commendable. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, unless a certain amount of time has passed, you cannot truly say with confidence that you actually got over this addiction. And again, like I said before, that's a good thing because once enough time has passed and you can objectively say, you look back in your journals, you look back with all the past struggles you had, and you look at how much you've actually changed, it's so much easier to believe it. And when it's easy to believe and you actually truly believe in it, then at that point you are truly free from porn. So it's good to actually make sure it's a good thing that it takes time.
Yeah. All this stuff takes time. It's a journey, as we're constantly saying on this show, but we really want our listeners to find freedom from porn. So, throughout the week, we've talked about a lot of different things, Kevin, but if you don't mind doing a little bit of recap, we've been talking about practical ways to quit porn.
Yep. Yep. So this entire you know
Short
span of
series,
episodes,
maybe?
series, yeah, maybe call it a series, yeah. This entire series we've been focusing really on the practical aspects of quitting porn. So obviously it's very important. The first thing that you want to do is establish why you even want. First of all, is it even a problem, which we covered previously, and then also why do you even want to quit in the first place? And then once you've established that, it's important to understand the uh, what behavior change actually entails. So in terms of the practical things of what we covered throughout this series of how to quit, it comes down mostly to two different things. One, your immediate environment, structuring your environment so that it's easier to quit. And then two, things that you can do internally to increase your conviction and your purpose as to why you actually want to quit in the first place. And when you're strategic with those two different things, your odds of quitting this and kicking this addiction and conquering it increase significantly. And
Mhm.
whether it happens, whether it takes uh, just a few months to get over it, where it takes a few years, if it takes decades, if you focus on these things and then focus on these practical habits, it's inevitable that over time you're going to overcome it. And it's not just our opinion on this, there's psychology to back this up. We talked about this in one of the previous episodes, but there's this process called automaticity where when you overlearn and do a certain practice over time, your subconscious mind becomes so familiar with it, it becomes a habit and you don't even have to think about it. So when you've
Mhm.
truly conquered pornography and your addiction to it, you don't really even have to like think about and consciously do all of these things constantly forever to
Right.
actually get over it. But if you go through and you put in the work to consciously put that effort in now through the process of automaticity, what takes willpower now in order to resist pornography down the line through the automaticity process, it becomes a product of the subconscious mind. You don't even have to think about it. It's going to be an
Right.
automatic thing. Just kind of like how the first time that you uh, drive to work or you went to a job interview, you're probably like really nervous driving over and you kind of probably even remember the specific drive even to this day. But do you remember your drive to work or like, um, even just like yesterday? Probably not because it's become such an automatic process in your subconscious mind. You don't even like, you probably don't even know the streets you turn on. You just know that it's just such an automatic thing your brain has, right? So because you can do that in one area of your life, you can do that in another area of your life, such as conquering porn addiction. The
Yeah.
habits that it takes, the habits and rituals that it takes to finally conquer this stuff, if you practice it and you're consistent with it over time, it becomes so natural you don't have to think about it anymore. And then
Yeah.
when you don't have to think about it anymore, you've truly conquered your addiction and you're actually free from porn.
Yeah. Well, on the Fapstinence podcast, that is our goal. We want you to find freedom from porn. And I think one of the other aspects of that, Kevin, is this is a holistic thing. Not only are you going to find it's helping you with your porn addiction, but I guarantee you it's going to start impacting in a healthier way your relationships with your friends, your family, your significant other, your boss, just the way that you see people around you. And so, with that in mind, the next episode following up next week, we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of living a porn free lifestyle. And believe me, I can tell you it's worth it. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and it does get easier. Yes, you do have to stay vigilant along the way. But as Kevin just mentioned, it's not one of those things where 3 years from now, if you've been religiously following this practice, you're going to have to be following with the same amount of intensity. If you start to get in good habits and build a better mentality about these things, it's not going to take the same level of intensity of commitment. You're just going to be doing it as part of your life. You're going to be seeing people in a different lens, and that's beyond worth it if you ask us.
Absolutely. So thanks so much for watching, guys. Again, practical ways to quit porn. We had a whole kind of series on this, so just go back on everything we talked about. It's going to be a topic that we talk about more in the future as well. So look out for the next podcast that we have, the pros and cons of quitting porn, because yes, there are cons to it, and you want to take that into consideration.
Mm,
But even if there are cons to it, and there's immediate pros and immediate cons, overall, and the reason we're doing this is we believe that the overall mission, the overall result is so worth it that the temporary cons, the temporary negatives of actually overcoming porn are worth it, right? But it's
absolutely.
important to acknowledge everything that can happen as a whole. The more knowledge you have at your disposal, the more you can make a plan of action to change. But part of that is understanding that there's going to be some negatives to overcoming, to just quitting porn in general, right? So we're going to go over that in the next episode. Thanks so much for watching as always, and we will see you later. Bye bye.
Bye bye.